She only wanted someone kind enough to care for her kids, not knowing the poor security guard she trusted was secretly watching her from the top floor, as the billionaire who owned her entire company. But when he finally takes off the uniform, will she forgive the lie or walk away from the only man who ever made her feel safe? Broken Heart watched till the end to see the twist that no one saw coming. And if you love emotional stories like this, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next one. The city glittered like a kingdom made of glass. And somewhere high above the streets, in a tower she helped build, Annie Ross ruled her empire. To the world, she was perfection in heels, the brilliant executive who closed million-dollar deals before breakfast, the single mother who raised 3 children on her own, the woman who smiled at every award dinner and never let anyone see her cracks. But behind the shimmer of her confidence lived exhaustion, the kind that no luxury could fix, the silence that echoes when success becomes your only companion. Every morning, her 3 children, Tony, Edward and little Selena, waited in the lobby, their laughter swallowed by marble floors and rushing footsteps. And every morning, Annie kissed their heads and disappeared into elevators filled with people who called her boss, but never mom. Until one day, they met him. He wasn't supposed to matter, just a man in a sky-blue uniform, standing quietly by the glass doors. Pablo Floyd, the new security guard. He didn't talk much. He didn't stand out. But the way he smiled at her children, patient, kind, unhurried, made the world feel warmer, even under fluorescent lights. When Selena dropped her stuffed bunny that morning, he bent down, brushed the dust off its fur, and said softly, "Every princess deserves her crown." Selena giggled. Annie looked up. And for the first time in years, her heart skipped. That single glance, between a tired woman and a quiet man in blue, would begin a story neither of them expected. Because sometimes, the one you overlook becomes the one you can't forget. Sometimes, the man who guards the door to your world is the one guarding the key to your heart. What Annie didn't know was that behind that simple uniform hid a truth larger than her entire career, a secret that could either destroy everything she built, or give her back the life she lost. He wasn't just a guard. He was Pablo Davidson Floyd, the silent billionaire, the real owner of the very tower she worked in. A man searching for something he could never buy, a reason to believe in love again. Their fates collided in one fleeting act of kindness, a dropped toy, a shared smile, a laugh that thawed 2 frozen hearts. And from that moment, destiny began to whisper a new story. She was the boss everyone admired, until her kids fell in love with the security guard downstairs. But the man she thought had nothing was the one who had everything she'd been searching for. The next few mornings at Ross and Davidson Tower followed the same rhythm, polished shoes clicking over marble floors, the elevator's soft chime echoing through the lobby, and the hum of business filling every corner. Yet, somewhere amid the glass reflections and cold handshakes, something quietly human began to bloom. It started with laughter. Tony and Edward had always dreaded the wait in the lobby before school. But ever since the day Pablo helped Selena retrieve her pink stuffed bunny, the kids had found a new reason to look forward to mornings. He was always there, in that same sky-blue uniform, cap slightly tilted, a kind smile under the hum of the rotating doors. When the boys arrived, he'd grin and whisper, "You know, I think your little sister's toy winked at me again." Selena would gasp dramatically, clutching the bunny to her chest. She did not. Pablo would raise his hands in mock surrender. "Then she's got the best poker face I've ever seen." The laughter that followed always drew a few curious glances from employees, some smiling, some frowning at the sight of a guard entertaining the boss's children. One morning, Tony came running to Pablo with a broken toy car in hand. "She fell from the steps," he said breathlessly, holding out the damaged car like a wounded soldier. "Ah," Pablo said, squatting beside him. "You see this axle here? Bent out of shape. Easy fix. You just need to bend it gently back. Like this." Tony tried, his small fingers fumbling. "Almost. Here," Pablo guided his hand patiently. Within minutes, the wheels spun again. "There. She's good as new." Tony's grin could have lit the lobby. "Thanks, Mr. Pablo." Pablo saluted him playfully. "Anytime, Captain Tony." Upstairs, behind her glass office, Annie noticed the commotion through the transparent elevator wall. Her eyes lingered longer than they should have. She watched Pablo kneel beside her sons, calm and patient, the kind of man who didn't rush the small things. A strange warmth rippled through her, something soft and dangerous. Admiration. Guilt. Curiosity. When she finally stepped into the lobby, heels clicking, her children turned toward her with beaming faces. "Mom. Pablo fixed my car." Tony shouted proudly. Annie's gaze flicked from the toy to the guard. He stood respectfully, cap in hand. "You didn't have to," she began. He smiled. "It was nothing, ma'am. Just needed a little care." Care. The word echoed somewhere deep inside her, a place she hadn't visited in a long time. "Still," she said, straightening her coat. "Thank you." He nodded once. Always happy to help. As she turned away, she caught a flicker of warmth in his eyes, not flirtation, but something deeper. Genuine kindness. It startled her. She was used to charm that came with motives. This was different. That evening, the sky broke open. Rain came down in thick silver sheets, hammering the city like 1,000 needles. Annie had stayed late, buried under files and calls. By the time she reached the lobby with her kids, the storm was in full swing. Pablo stood by the entrance, radio crackling at his belt, water dripping from the brim of his cap. He saw her struggling with her umbrella, 3 kids, 2 bags, and an armful of folders. "Ma'am, wait," he said quickly. "You'll get soaked." "I'll be fine," she said, though her voice betrayed her. He stepped forward, opening his large security umbrella, the industrial kind, built for storms. "Let me." Before she could object, he bent down, tucking the umbrella over her children first. Selena squealed as rain splashed around her boots. "Stay close, princess," he said gently. "No raindrop gets past me." The boys giggled, marching beside him. Annie followed, holding her papers against her chest, her hair damp at the edges. At the car, he helped load the bags while shielding them all from the downpour. For a second, their hands brushed, hers cold and trembling, his warm and steady. "Thank you," she murmured. He looked up, rain sliding down his cheek. "Any time, ma'am. It's my job." But they both knew it wasn't. For a moment, the world shrank. No skyscraper, no title, no rank. Just 2 souls standing under the same storm. That night, Annie sat at her kitchen counter long after the kids had gone to bed. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional whisper of rain against the glass. She poured herself a glass of wine, stared at the reflection of the city lights, and sighed. "Get a grip, Annie," she muttered. "You're thinking about a guard." A guard. Her mind replayed the sound of his voice, low, gentle, unhurried. The way he'd looked at her children like they were something sacred. The way he'd said care. She shook her head, pushing the thought away. She had no time for distractions. Not with 3 kids, not with a company trying to outbid her every move. And yet, her heart didn't listen. Meanwhile, across town, Pablo sat in his modest apartment, 1 room, 1 couch, and a single dim lamp. On the table before him lay a half-finished cup of tea and a stack of old documents, corporate reports, architectural blueprints, and an envelope marked confidential, Davidson Holdings. He closed the file slowly and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts weren't on business tonight. They were on Annie. The way her voice trembled when she said thank you. The exhaustion behind her confidence. The faint sadness in her eyes when she looked at her children, as if she carried too many worlds alone. He smiled faintly. "Strong woman," he murmured. "Too strong for her own good." He picked up a small notebook and jotted something down. "Tomorrow, ask the janitor to fix the lobby heater before the kids come in. Selena hates the cold." He chuckled to himself. "You're losing it, Floyd," he whispered. But deep down, he knew he wasn't. He was simply remembering what it felt like to care. The next morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the city washed and gleaming. Annie arrived earlier than usual, her coffee still steaming in hand. As she entered the lobby, she saw her children clustered near Pablo's station again, giggling. He was showing them a magic trick with a deck of worn cards. "Pick any card," he told Tony. Tony pulled one out and held it tight to his chest. "Now," Pablo said dramatically, "put it back, shuffle it, and watch closely." He flipped the top card. Tony's eyes widened. "That's impossible," the boy shouted. Pablo winked. "Magic happens when you believe, Captain Tony." Annie couldn't help it, she laughed. Out loud. The sound startled her. He looked up, caught her watching, and smiled. "Morning, ma'am. She walked over, pretending composure. "You're quite the entertainer, Mr. Floyd." He shrugged. "Only when the audience is this good." Her kids giggled. She smiled despite herself. "Thank you for keeping them busy," she said quietly. "It's no trouble," he replied. "They make the mornings less empty." Something in his tone caught her, an echo of loneliness she recognized too well. She nodded once, then turned toward the elevator. But before the doors closed, she glanced back. He was kneeling again, helping Edward zip his backpack. His face calm. His smile real. That image stayed with her all day. Through the meetings. Through the phone calls. Through the endless noise of the office. By evening, it had carved itself somewhere she couldn't erase. That night, as she tucked Selena into bed, the little girl whispered sleepily, "Mommy, is Pablo coming to work tomorrow?" Annie froze. "I think so, honey." "Why?" Selena smiled dreamily. "Because he makes the building feel happy." Annie kissed her forehead, blinking back an unexpected tear. "Yes," she whispered. "He does." Outside, the city lights shimmered on the glass walls of Ross and Davidson Tower, cold, brilliant, and unfeeling. But down in the lobby, under the warm glow of the security desk lamp, a man in a blue uniform sat quietly, smiling to himself. Because somewhere between the laughter of 3 children and the silent admiration of their mother, a story had begun, the kind that didn't need wealth or titles to shine. The days rolled into each other like glass doors sliding open and shut. The same lobby. The same faces. The same blue uniform. And yet, something had begun to shift, not just in the air between Annie Ross and Pablo Floyd, but in the way others started to notice. It started with whispers. Denise Carver, Annie's sharp-tongued co-worker from marketing, had the kind of eyes that saw too much and a voice that never knew how to keep still. One morning, she spotted Annie in the lobby, standing near the front desk. Annie was dressed in her usual elegance, white blouse, navy skirt, hair pulled back like armor. But this time, she wasn't talking to a client or an investor. She was talking to the security guard. Worse, she was smiling. Denise leaned against the glass wall, watching as Pablo bent slightly to hand Annie her dropped keycard. Their fingers brushed. Annie's polite laugh echoed faintly in the marble hall. By noon, the story had already grown wings. "Did you hear? The boss is flirting with the guard." "No way, Annie Ross. She's got standards." "You didn't see her face this morning." "Oh honey, that woman's lonely. Even a guard looks charming when you've been single that long." The gossip snaked its way through cubicles and corridors, fed by envy and coffee. By the time Annie stepped into the conference room that afternoon, she felt the silence, the kind that wasn't quiet but watching. When she looked up from her files, Denise was smiling. "Rough morning?" she asked sweetly. "Why?" Annie replied, wary. "Oh, no reason." Denise's tone dripped with mock innocence. "Just heard you were, keeping the building safe in your own way." The room snickered. Annie froze. Heat crept up her neck. She shot a glare so sharp it could have shattered glass. "Watch your mouth, Denise." Denise shrugged, all fake charm. "Relax, Annie. Everyone needs a little excitement, right? Even if it wears a uniform." Annie slammed her folder shut and walked out before she said something she'd regret. Downstairs, Pablo stood by the glass doors, greeting tenants with his usual calm warmth. When he saw Annie marching toward the exit, her heels snapping like gunfire, he could tell something was wrong. "Ma'am," he asked softly, "everything all right?" She hesitated. "Just office nonsense." He tilted his head slightly, reading the tension in her eyes. "You mean gossip?" She sighed. "It doesn't matter." He smiled, that easy grounded smile that seemed to make the noise of the world fade away. "Let them talk. People always do when they see something they don't understand." She looked at him, almost defensive. "It's not just about me. You could get in trouble too. They'll twist things." Pablo's gaze held hers steadily. "Then let them. I know who I am." The simplicity of that answer silenced her. He said it like a man who had no doubts about himself, no need to prove, no fear of judgment. She envied that certainty. Annie exhaled, her shoulders easing a little. "You really don't care what people think of you, do you?" Pablo shook his head. I care what's true. The rest is just noise. She smiled faintly, almost in disbelief. You talk like you've seen the world. He looked out at the city skyline through the glass doors. Maybe I have. There was something in his tone, an old wisdom that didn't belong to a man paid by the hour. Annie felt it, even if she didn't yet understand it. That night, the city hummed under rain again. Inside his small apartment, Pablo sat by a narrow wooden desk. The walls were bare except for a single framed photo, an old picture of his parents in front of a modest home. A reminder of where he came from, and how far he'd gone. He flipped open his black laptop. Instantly, the glow of the screen filled the room. Dozens of folders appeared: Davidson Holdings, Floyd Enterprises, Global Property Trust. Graphs. Stock reports. Financial statements worth billions. He scrolled through pages of data with practiced ease. Every line of text reflected a life no one around him knew, a life he'd hidden behind a badge and a blue shirt. A message blinked on his screen. Incoming call, Evan, CFO. He clicked accept. Sir, the voice said urgently. The board's getting restless. They're asking when you're coming back. You can't keep this undercover act forever. Pablo leaned back, his voice calm. Not yet. I'm still observing. Observing who, exactly? The people who think titles define worth, and the ones who know better. Evan hesitated. And what about her? Pablo's fingers froze on the keyboard. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. Finally, he said quietly, she reminds me of why I started all this. Evan sighed. You're playing with fire, boss. What if she finds out? Pablo's tone softened. Then I'll tell her the truth, when she's ready to hear it. He ended the call and closed the laptop. The room went dark again. Only the rain whispered outside. The next morning, the sun returned, bright and merciless. Annie stepped into the lobby with her coffee in hand, still thinking about the day before. She'd spent the night convincing herself it didn't matter what people thought, that Pablo was just a kind man doing his job. But her heart, traitorous thing, didn't quite agree. As she walked past the front desk, she noticed him again. This time, Pablo was standing at attention, his uniform neatly pressed, eyes lowered to a magazine. Her brow furrowed. It was the Financial Review, one of the toughest business publications in the country. But something looked off. She stopped beside him, arching an eyebrow. Good morning, Mr. Floyd. Expanding your horizons. He looked up innocently. Trying to keep up with you, ma'am. Really? She nodded toward the magazine. Then maybe you should try reading it right side up. He froze. The magazine was, indeed, upside down. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other, and then Annie burst out laughing. The sound startled even herself. Pablo smiled, feigning embarrassment. Caught me. I should hope so, she said, still laughing. You'd make a terrible investor. Maybe, he said quietly. But I've got a good eye for people. Her laughter faded, replaced by something gentler. Their eyes met, and for a second, the rest of the lobby disappeared. Then a voice broke through the moment. Denise again, passing by with her tablet. Morning, Annie. Morning, guard. Annie stiffened. But Pablo just smiled, unbothered. Morning, ma'am. Denise walked off, disappointed she hadn't gotten a rise. Annie looked back at him. You really don't mind? He shook his head. You don't give people like that your peace. You just keep doing right. It was such a simple statement, yet it settled inside her like truth she'd been missing for years. That evening, as Annie drove home, she found herself thinking not about deadlines or presentations, but about the man downstairs who read the Financial Review upside down. How strange, she thought, that someone so ordinary could feel so different. And she didn't know it yet, but upstairs, in the hidden floors of corporate power, the man she was starting to care for held more authority than anyone in her entire firm. He wasn't just the guard at the door. He was the door itself, the one that could open her life to something she'd never imagined. She had no idea the man in blue was richer than every executive she'd ever reported to. If you were Annie, would you still trust your instincts, or would you start doubting your heart after hearing all that gossip? Comment below what you think Annie should do next, ignore the rumors or dig deeper into who Pablo really is. The day began with chaos, as usual. Emails stacked like bricks, the printer jammed mid-contract, and a client in Dubai refused to sign a deal unless Annie Ross personally called him before noon. It was nearing 1 o'clock when Annie realized she hadn't eaten, and worse, neither had her children. Tony, Edward, and little Selena were waiting downstairs, as they did every Friday, for their mom's office lunch date. It was their ritual: sandwiches, juice boxes, and whatever sweets Annie could grab between meetings. Only this time, when she arrived at the cafeteria with 3 brown paper bags in hand, it was packed. A corporate seminar had filled every seat. "Mom, I'm hungry," Edward groaned, tugging at her sleeve. Selena, clutching her pink teddy, looked up with big eyes. "Can we eat on the floor?" Annie sighed. "Not here, honey. It's too crowded." From behind, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "You could try the lobby," it said gently. "It's quieter down there." She turned, and there he was. Pablo Floyd. In his sky-blue uniform, leaning slightly on the counter, the same calm presence that seemed immune to chaos. Annie hesitated. "The lobby floor? You're serious?" He smiled. "It's not the fanciest restaurant in town, but the service is pretty good." Tony snorted. "You mean you?" Pablo winked. "Exactly, kid." Before Annie could argue, Selena had already taken his hand. "Let's go, Mr. Guard." Pablo chuckled softly. "You can just call me Pablo." And so the executive mother and her 3 kids followed the security guard to the lobby, a patch of sunlight spilling through the tall glass doors, where polished marble met a stretch of quiet peace. Pablo pulled out a few folding chairs from the corner and set them in a small circle. Annie looked half amused, half mortified. "Are we seriously doing this?" she asked. He shrugged. "You said they were hungry." "Touché," she said with a smirk. They spread the sandwiches out. Tony handed Pablo one. "You have to eat too." "Oh, I couldn't." "Mom says sharing is good manners," Edward interrupted. Annie nodded, suppressing a smile. "They're right." So Pablo joined them, the boss, her children, and the guard, sitting cross-legged on the clean marble floor, eating sandwiches like old friends at a picnic no one else was invited to. For a while, the sound of laughter replaced the noise of office phones and echoing heels. Pablo told them stories, funny, vivid tales about his old neighborhood. He spoke of sneaking onto rooftops to watch the stars, helping an old baker mix dough before dawn, and getting caught once by a street artist who painted his portrait for free. "Wow," Tony said, eyes wide. "You've met a lot of people." Pablo nodded. "Every person teaches you something, if you pay attention." Annie raised an eyebrow. "That's quite philosophical for a security guard." He smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how much wisdom you can collect by standing still and watching the world go by." His words lingered. There was something about the way he spoke, thoughtful, grounded, yet strangely refined. It was like hearing a poet dressed as a watchman. Annie found herself studying him, the careful way he listened when her children spoke, how he always looked people in the eye, how his laughter wasn't loud but full of sincerity. He didn't fill silence with noise. He filled it with meaning. After a few moments, Edward asked the question no one else dared to. "Mr. Pablo, do you have any kids?" The guard's hand paused mid-sandwich. His eyes softened. "No, Edward. Not anymore." The air went still. Even the children sensed it, the weight behind those words. Annie spoke quietly. "I'm sorry. You don't have to." He shook his head gently. "It's all right. Some losses don't fade. You just learn to carry them." Annie nodded slowly. "I understand." She hesitated, then said, almost in a whisper, "I lost my husband 5 years ago. Car accident. One call changed everything." Pablo looked at her with quiet empathy, not pity. "You've been raising them alone since then?" "Yes." Her voice was steady, but her eyes flickered with exhaustion. "I had to rebuild. Work became survival. If I stopped moving, I'd fall apart." He said softly, "You've built more than a company, Annie. You've built courage." The simplicity of his tone made her throat tighten. No one had said that to her, not once in 5 years. People praised her success, her strength, her discipline, but never her heart. Her gaze met his. You talk like you've been through storms. He smiled faintly. Haven't we all? They both laughed quietly, two survivors in different uniforms, sharing warmth on a marble floor that felt more human than any penthouse boardroom. When lunch was done, Annie started packing up, but Selena refused to move. She crawled into Pablo's lap, clutching her teddy. You should come to lunch again, she declared confidently. Mommy, can he? Annie blinked. Sweetheart, Mr. Floyd is working. Selena shook her head. Then we'll bring lunch here. Pablo chuckled. I think that sounds perfect. Annie tried to hide her smile but failed. You're a bad influence, you know. He grinned. Only the good kind. They all stood. As they turned to leave, Annie paused. Thank you for this. I didn't realize how much I needed to laugh. Pablo bowed his head slightly. You just needed to breathe, ma'am. For a moment, she didn't feel like a boss or a widow, just a woman standing across from a man who somehow saw straight through the armor she'd worn for years. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Annie sat by the window with a cup of tea. She should have been preparing for tomorrow's investor pitch. Instead, she found herself replaying moments. Pablo's laugh, his calm eyes, the way he said courage like it was something sacred. Her phone buzzed, a message from Denise. Careful, Annie. People are talking again. Annie turned off the phone and looked out at the glowing skyline. For once, she didn't care. Downstairs, in the quiet of the lobby, Pablo cleaned up the last crumbs of their impromptu lunch. Selena's pink juice box sat forgotten on the floor. He smiled faintly, setting it on his desk as if it were a keepsake. He checked his watch, 11:45 p.m. Almost time for his nightly call. Opening his laptop, he joined a private conference under an anonymous profile. A room full of suits appeared on screen, men discussing investment metrics, property valuations, and board reports. One of them spoke, Mr. Floyd. The Davidson portfolio expansion is complete. Shall we release the statement? He looked at the file quietly. Not yet. There's something I still need to understand, about people. Sir. He smiled faintly. I'm not done observing. The call ended. The silence returned. Pablo leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, Courage, huh? Guess she's not the only one rebuilding. The next morning, when Annie entered the lobby, she saw the juice box sitting neatly on Pablo's desk. A small note beneath it read, Thanks for lunch, Selena. Save me a seat next time. Annie couldn't help it, she smiled. For the first time in years, her day began not with tension, but with warmth. Sometimes, family isn't found by blood, but by who shows up when no one else does. Have you ever met someone who made you feel seen, not for your status or strength, but for your heart? It started with laughter. Not the kind you hear in meetings or networking events, but real laughter, the kind that fills a room, unplanned and alive. That morning, Annie had stopped in the lobby to drop off a file, only to find Pablo showing her kids a ridiculous card trick. Edward's eyes were wide with wonder. Tony clapped like it was magic. And Selena, as always, clung to Pablo's arm, giggling uncontrollably. Annie couldn't help it, she laughed. It was light, unguarded, something she hadn't done in years. But what she didn't notice was who else was watching. From the mezzanine above, Denise, her overly polished, always smirking coworker, leaned against the railing, phone in hand, snapping a photo. Her lips curved into a satisfied grin. By noon, the office was buzzing. The boss has a crush on the security guard. I heard she brings her kids just to see him. Must be lonely at the top. The whispers crept through the glass hallways like smoke. When Annie entered the conference room that afternoon, the chatter stopped abruptly. She set her files down, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Denise gave a mock-innocent smile. Rough morning, Annie? Annie didn't look up. Productive, actually. Oh good. I just thought maybe you were busy downstairs. A few people chuckled. Annie's eyes lifted, sharp as steel. I'm sorry, Denise. Is there a point to that comment, or are you just auditioning for a gossip column? The laughter died instantly. Denise flushed. Annie continued, voice steady. Let me make something clear. That man downstairs? He's kinder, more respectful, and more professional than half the people sitting at this table. So before anyone feels superior, maybe look in a mirror first. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in a long while, Annie's composure had teeth. That evening, as she walked toward the parking lot, the winter wind cut sharp against her face. She was still angry, not at the gossip, but at herself. Why did she even care? She'd faced worse, failed deals, boardroom betrayals, even the ache of widowhood. But somehow this, the laughter, the judgment, felt heavier. Her car waited beneath the dim streetlight. And there, on the windshield, was a single white rose. A folded note was tucked beneath it. She opened it carefully, the handwriting neat and deliberate. For the woman who still believes in kindness. Pablo. For a moment, the noise of the world faded. She stood there, heart thudding quietly. Her fingers brushed over the soft petals, fragile against the cold air. The next morning, the rose sat in a small glass vase on her desk. Denise noticed it during the team briefing. "Lovely flower," she said sweetly. "Secret admirer?" Annie smiled faintly. "No secret. Just a reminder that good people still exist." Denise's smirk faltered. Annie went back to her work. A few weeks later, Annie attended the company's winter gala, an extravagant affair held in the same skyscraper she helped design. She wore an elegant silver gown, her hair swept into a soft bun. She moved through the crowd with the poise of someone born for the spotlight, but inside, she still felt that quiet ache. At the far corner of the ballroom stood Pablo, in uniform, as part of the event security team. His posture was professional, but his gaze followed her, subtle and protective. She caught his eyes once, and smiled, just enough for him to notice. Halfway through the night, a rival investor named Raymond Langston approached her. Slick, arrogant, dressed in designer confidence. "Ms. Ross," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "You light up the room tonight." She accepted the drink politely. "Thank you, Mr. Langston. I trust your new development is progressing." He smirked. "It would progress faster if I had someone like you on my side." She rolled her eyes slightly. "I'm afraid I'm not available for hire." "Pity," he said, leaning closer. "Though I hear you've taken quite an interest in your security staff. Very humble of you." Annie froze. "Excuse me." Raymond tilted his glass toward the lobby door. Pablo stood there, speaking with another guard. "Seems a bit beneath your class, don't you think?" Before Annie could respond, Pablo stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "Sir, if you're done being disrespectful, perhaps you should move along." Raymond laughed derisively. "And what are you going to do? Throw me out?" "Only if you keep talking," Pablo said evenly. Annie's voice sliced through the tension. "That's enough." All eyes turned. She set her champagne down, her voice steady and sharp. "Respect isn't about status," she said. "It's about character. Something you seem to lack, Mr. Langston." A hush fell. The investor blinked, embarrassed, before muttering an apology and walking off. Annie turned to Pablo, her expression softening. "Thank you." He shook his head. "You didn't need me to save you. You handled it perfectly." She smiled faintly. "Still, it's nice to know someone would." Later that night, as the ballroom emptied, she found herself outside on the terrace, overlooking the city lights. The winter air brushed her skin, cool and clean. Pablo appeared quietly beside her. "You shouldn't stand out here without a coat." "Old habit," she said. "I like the quiet." They stood in silence for a moment, the city glowing beneath them. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever wonder what people would think if they knew who you really were?" He looked at her, startled. "What do you mean?" "You carry yourself differently. Like someone who's seen the world from the top, not the bottom." He chuckled softly. "Maybe I just like the view from the ground better." Her lips curved. "You're strange, Mr. Floyd." "I'll take that as a compliment." The sound of her laughter drifted into the night, soft and fragile as falling snow. When she went home that night, Annie couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed everything, the gossip, the rose, the way he defended her without hesitation. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel. Hope. Down in his apartment, Pablo sat at his desk, staring at a photograph of Annie and her children. He didn't touch it, just watched it under the dim light. He whispered, "You still believe in kindness. Maybe that's why I can't stop believing in you." He closed his eyes. The white rose she'd once received now sat on his table too, perfectly preserved in glass. In defending him, she unknowingly protected the man who owned everything she worked for. Have you ever defended someone others judged unfairly, only to realize later how much that moment revealed about you? Comment below if you've ever seen love or kindness blossom in unexpected places. Don't miss the truth beneath the surface, where masks begin to fall and hidden identities come to light. The office was unusually tense that Monday morning. The hum of printers, the clicking of heels, even the low murmur of conversations felt off. Annie could sense it before she even reached her desk. Her assistant, Clara, stood waiting, pale and anxious. "Ms. Ross, have you seen the email?" Annie frowned. "What email?" Clara swallowed. "The one from corporate. It just came through. Davidson Holdings acquired controlling shares of the company." The words hit like ice water. Annie stopped mid-step. "That's impossible. Davidson doesn't even." Clara hesitated. "They do now. And the board's been summoned for an emergency meeting at 7 p.m. tonight." Around them, whispers spread like wildfire. Phones buzzed. Colleagues huddled in nervous clusters. A few were already speculating about layoffs, restructuring, and the end of an era. Annie's heartbeat quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "All right. Get me the latest financials and call a meeting with my team in an hour." Inside, though, a cold unease grew. Something about this takeover didn't add up. That evening, the sky bled into shades of bruised purple over the city skyline. Annie stayed late, pacing her glass-walled office as the floors emptied one by one. Through the lobby windows below, she saw Pablo at his usual post, uniform crisp, posture relaxed, face half-lit by the glow of the front desk lamp. He looked up just once, catching her gaze. He gave a small nod, a silent reassurance. For a moment, she felt grounded again. But later, when she came down to leave, his station was empty. She asked the night janitor, "Where's Pablo?" The old man shook his head. Said he had to take care of something important. "Left an hour ago." Her chest tightened unexpectedly. Without saying goodbye, she tried to brush it off, but the quiet of the lobby, the echo of her heels on the marble floor, felt wrong without him there. The next morning, the building buzzed again, but this time with curiosity. "Big announcement today," someone whispered. "The new owner's coming in person." Annie walked through the corridor, professional mask in place. But her pulse was uneven. Who was this mysterious buyer? Why Davidson Holdings? The name felt vaguely familiar, like something she'd once read in passing but never connected to her world. When the clock struck noon, a message appeared in her inbox. "Private meeting, 7 p.m. boardroom 15A. Attendance mandatory." She exhaled slowly, staring at the screen. Something inside her twisted, a whisper of intuition she couldn't quite name. By dusk, the top floor of the skyscraper was bathed in gold from the setting sun. The glass reflected the city lights below, glimmering like fireflies trapped in steel. Annie entered the boardroom, clutching her notes like a shield. Every executive sat stiffly, murmuring theories. Denise was there too, smug as ever. "I heard the new owner's some tycoon from abroad," she said with a smirk. "Maybe he'll finally bring some real discipline around here." Annie ignored her and took her seat. At exactly 7:05, the double doors opened. Footsteps echoed across the marble. The room fell into silence. And there he was. Pablo Floyd, but not in uniform. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, the kind that whispered quiet authority. His hair was combed back neatly, and there was no trace of the easygoing guard she'd come to know. He walked with calm confidence to the head of the table, his gaze steady, and when it met hers, it held something unspoken. Annie's breath caught. Someone at the far end of the room whispered, "That's him? That's the new owner." The chairman rose nervously. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our new majority shareholder, Mr. Pablo Davidson." The name struck like thunder. Annie froze. Davidson. Pablo Davidson. Her mind reeled, the reports, the discreet investments, the sudden buyout. Everything connected at once. She managed to whisper, "You're Davidson?" Pablo's expression softened slightly. "Yes, Annie. I am." The room seemed to vanish, the murmurs, the shocked stares, all fading beneath the sound of her own heartbeat. He continued, voice calm but firm. "I never meant to deceive anyone. After what happened in my former company, betrayal, greed, I wanted to see how people treated a man without status or wealth. So, I came here as a guard. To observe, to understand." He glanced around the table. "I learned a lot." His gaze landed on Annie again. "Especially from you." She felt her stomach twist. So this was all a test? "No," he said gently. "It was a search for something real." Her hands trembled slightly against the table. "You let me think you were struggling. You let my children." "I never lied about who I was as a person," he said quietly. "Only about what I owned." Annie rose, her voice shaking. "That's the same thing, Pablo. You built a friendship, a connection, under false pretenses. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" His face flickered with pain. "I do. I've lived it. That's why I did this. To find someone who saw me for me, not for my money." She shook her head slowly. "You should have trusted me with the truth." He looked down. "I wanted to. But I was afraid I'd lose the only genuine thing I'd found." The silence between them was sharp enough to break. When the meeting ended, Annie walked out before anyone could speak to her. Pablo tried to follow, but she turned back once, eyes cold with hurt. "Congratulations, Mr. Davidson," she said softly. "I hope your experiment was worth it." Then she left. That night, she sat in her car in the empty parking lot, staring at the city lights through the windshield. Everything replayed in her mind, the laughter, the rose, the late-night conversations, the quiet kindness that had made her believe again. Was any of it real? Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Never again," she whispered. "Never again will I fall for an illusion." In his penthouse suite across town, Pablo stood before the window, the skyline glowing below him. He took off his tie, his reflection staring back in the glass. Not the billionaire, not the businessman, but the man she now hated. He whispered to himself, "I didn't want to hurt you, Annie. I just wanted to prove that love could still exist without lies." But even he knew, this time, the cost of truth might be too high. The man she trusted had become the man she couldn't forgive. Have you ever discovered a truth that changed the way you saw someone, for better or for worse? If you've ever been torn between trust and truth, comment below with broken heart. Stay tuned for the distance between them, where broken hearts face the test of time and redemption begins to stir. The days that followed were quieter than Annie had ever imagined. The office lobby, once filled with laughter from her kids and the gentle warmth of a certain blue-uniformed guard, now felt cold, sterile. Even the walls seemed to echo differently. She moved through her days like a ghost in high heels. Meetings, calls, presentations, all perfectly executed, yet entirely hollow. Every corridor reminded her of him. Every reflection in the glass doors whispered his name, Pablo. Except he wasn't just Pablo. He was Jacob Davidson, the billionaire who'd tested the world by pretending to be a guard. The man who made her heart feel alive again, and shattered it in a single night. Annie ignored every call from him. Every text that began with, "Please let me explain." She deleted them all, but her hands trembled each time. At home, her children noticed. "Mom," little Selena asked one evening, tugging on her sleeve, "where's Mr. Pablo? He hasn't been downstairs for a long time." Annie paused, forcing a smile. "He got busy, sweetheart." Tony frowned, older and wiser than his years. "Busy?" He looked like he wanted to stay forever. Her throat tightened. "He had to go," she said softly. Edward asked, "Will he come back?" Annie didn't answer. She simply stood, walked to the sink, and stared out the window, her reflection faint against the city lights. That night, after tucking the kids into bed, she found a small envelope in her mailbox. Her name, Annie Ross, written in neat, familiar handwriting. Her hands shook as she tore it open. Inside was a letter. "Annie, I didn't mean to deceive you. I only wanted to know what it felt like to be seen, not for what I owned, but for who I was. You did that for me. When I first met you, you weren't the woman in charge of the skyscraper. You were the woman who smiled through exhaustion, who loved her children fiercely, who gave warmth to everyone but herself. You made me believe in good again. I fell in love with you long before you knew my name. Pablo. She froze, tears threatening to spill. Then, with trembling fingers, she crumpled the letter and threw it into the trash. No, she whispered. You don't get to say that now. But she didn't move. The paper sat there, white against the silver bin, like a ghost of what could have been. Days turned into weeks. The boardroom was her new battlefield. Colleagues whispered about the buyout, about the guard who turned out to be the boss. Some pitied her. Others mocked her behind closed doors. But Annie stayed silent, straight-backed and composed. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Until one evening, after everyone had left, she found herself standing by the lobby glass again. The night guard on duty was new, young, nervous, unremarkable. Nothing like him. She sighed, the loneliness pressing against her chest like an ache that wouldn't fade. Upstairs, her office light glowed faintly as she sat at her desk, lost in the silence. Her fingers traced the edge of a photo, her kids, smiling at a park, Pablo in the background holding Selena on his shoulders. Her chest tightened. She picked up her phone again, stared at his name, then put it back down. Don't be weak, she whispered to herself. He lied. You don't need him. But the truth she couldn't admit, even to herself, was that she did. Across the city, Pablo sat in his penthouse office, surrounded by walls of glass and silence. He had everything money could buy, yet nothing he truly wanted. He'd stepped back from Annie's company division, allowing her full control, just as she deserved. He told himself it was respect. Truthfully, it was punishment, for the way his lie had cost him the only genuine connection he'd ever known. He hadn't stopped writing her letters, though. Dozens of them, tucked away in his desk. Letters he'd never send. You were my light in the dark, Annie. You made me want to be a better man. I still wait for the sound of your voice. Each word felt like a confession to the night sky. When his assistant asked if he'd be attending the company's annual charity gala, he shook his head. No, he said simply. Not this year. Because what use was celebration when the woman who'd changed his world wouldn't even look his way? Back at home, Annie sat in the dark after putting the children to sleep. Tony, her oldest, crept downstairs quietly and found her sitting by the living room window, clutching a cup of cold tea. Mom, he whispered. She turned, startled. Tony, go to bed, honey. He shook his head. I just wanted to ask something. She smiled faintly. What is it? Tony hesitated, then said, Mr. Pablo looked at you like Dad used to. Annie's smile faltered. What do you mean? You know, like you were the only person in the world, Tony said softly. Dad used to look at you that way before the accident. She inhaled sharply, looking away. Tony's eyes glistened. I think Mr. Pablo loved you, Mom. Maybe he still does. Her heart cracked in silence. When Tony went back upstairs, Annie finally let the tears fall, silent, steady years of buried pain spilling out. She cried for the man she lost, for the man she loved, and for the woman she no longer recognized in the mirror. By midnight, the house was quiet again. The city outside hummed softly with distant traffic and the low glow of streetlights. Annie walked to the trash bin, pulled out Pablo's crumpled letter, and smoothed it open on the table. She read it again, slower this time. Each word hit harder than the last. By the final line, her tears fell freely. For the first time in years, she whispered into the quiet room, I miss you. The sound of her own voice startled her. Because for the first time, it wasn't pride speaking, it was her heart. She thought walking away would heal her pride, but it only broke her heart. Do you think Annie should forgive Pablo for hiding his true identity, or was her pain too deep to mend? Comment Team Forgive if you believe love deserves a second chance, or Team Move On if you think some secrets can't be undone. The morning the storm broke, the city was already heavy with rain. Sheets of water slammed against the glass walls of the Ross and Davidson Tower, the very building that once symbolized Annie's triumph, now echoing with panic and betrayal. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Emails poured in. Headlines flashed across her tablet like lightning bolts. Ross and Davidson accused of corporate fraud. Millions missing from investor accounts. The CEO's protégé under investigation. Annie's stomach twisted as she scrolled through the chaos. She hadn't done anything wrong, but in the world she lived in, perception was power. Denise stormed into her office, voice dripping with venom. The auditors are on their way. I warned you, Annie, playing charity with that guard instead of watching your back. Annie stood tall, though her voice trembled. This isn't my doing, Denise. And you know it. Denise smirked. The world doesn't care who did it. It only cares who falls first. As Denise left, Annie's phone buzzed with another notification, a message from an unknown number. Stay calm. Don't speak to the press. It's being handled. P. Her heart stopped. P. Only one person signed like that. By noon, the storm outside had turned the city silver-gray. Reporters gathered near the tower entrance, shouting questions as Annie tried to leave for the meeting with the auditors. Cameras flashed, mics shoved toward her face. Ms. Ross, did you manipulate investor reports? Are you stepping down? Is it true your company's owner vanished? Security pushed them back, but Annie could feel her chest tightening. She wasn't built for scandal. She was built for order, structure, control. And right now, everything she'd built was collapsing. Until she heard a familiar voice behind her, calm, firm, and commanding. Back up. Give the lady some space. The crowd turned. Pablo. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't the quiet guard anymore. He stood in a black coat, drenched from the rain, eyes steady as stone. His mere presence made the noise fade. Annie froze, lips parting. Pablo. He nodded once. Get in the car. Trust me, he said softly. Please. For reasons she couldn't explain, she obeyed. Inside the sleek black sedan, silence hung thick. Rain pounded on the roof like distant applause. Annie's pulse raced. Why are you here? She asked finally. He looked out the window. Because someone had to protect you. I don't need protecting, she snapped. I need the truth. He turned, eyes piercing. And that's exactly what I came to give you. He handed her a folder, confidential reports, bank records, signed documents. All showing that a senior partner, not Annie, had rerouted funds without authorization. Your name was the one left holding the bag, he said. But I made sure that won't stick. She stared at the papers in disbelief. How did you even? He cut her off gently. I still own controlling shares in this company, Annie. I never left you completely alone. Her throat tightened. You did this, all of this, for me? He leaned back, voice low. I didn't do it for the company. I did it for you. The words hit her like thunder. Outside, the rain slowed, as if even the sky paused to listen. Hours later, the board meeting ended in stunned silence. The auditors cleared her name, confirming the culprit. The media's tone shifted from accusation to awe. Fraud scandal turns out to be internal error. CEO Annie Ross cleared of all wrongdoing. Davidson Holdings steps in to save the day. Annie stood by her office window afterward, watching the storm fade. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe. But the peace was bittersweet. Pablo had done what no one else ever had. He believed in her when everyone else doubted. And yet, she'd been the one to doubt him. A knock on the door broke her thoughts. She turned. It was him. Still in his rain-soaked coat, his expression softer now. I just came to make sure you were okay, he said quietly. Annie tried to speak, but her throat caught. Why, Pablo? After everything, after what I said. He gave a small smile. You once told me that kindness doesn't belong to people in power. I wanted to prove it still exists, even when it hurts. She stepped closer. Why do you care so much? Because, he said, his voice trembling for the first time, you saw me when no one else did. Her chest tightened. Tears welled, unbidden. And you, she whispered, you made me feel alive again. A small sound came from the doorway, laughter, soft and familiar. Mr. Pablo. 3 tiny figures ran in before she could react. Tony, Edward, and little Selena. They wrapped around his legs like vines. "Mom said you weren't coming back," Selena exclaimed. "We missed you." He knelt, smiling through the tears he tried to hide. "I missed you too, princess." Tony grinned. "Did you fix Mom's job? The news people said she's a hero again." Pablo chuckled. "I think your mom's always been the hero." Annie watched, heart melting with every word, every laugh. The sight of her children with him, so natural, so full of joy, broke something open inside her. When the children ran ahead to show him their drawings, she finally whispered, "You didn't have to come back." He turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I did." "Why?" she asked. He smiled softly. "Because you once asked if kindness still exists." "It does, Annie. It's standing right here." The office lights dimmed as the evening sun returned, streaking gold through the rain-streaked glass. Annie felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. He wasn't just the man she'd fallen for. He was the storm that had tested her, and the calm that followed. For the first time, she didn't see the billionaire, or the guard. She saw the man. And for the first time, she allowed herself to hope again. She had spent her life building walls. He tore them down with love. Do you think love can truly rebuild trust after a painful betrayal, or does something always remain broken? Comment love heals all if you believe in forgiveness and second chances, or some scars stay if you think some wounds never fully fade. Snow fell like whispers outside the Ross and Noble Tower that Christmas Eve night. The city lights shimmered in gold and white, and for once, the building that had always felt cold and corporate glowed with something softer: hope. Inside, the lobby was almost empty. The grand marble floor reflected the twinkle of holiday garlands, and a single Christmas tree stood in the corner, tall, elegant, and trimmed with silver ribbons. Annie walked in, clutching her handbag and a box of unsent gifts for her staff. Her eyes were tired, but her heart was strangely restless. Something, or someone, had been tugging at her thoughts all evening. She hadn't seen Pablo since the storm had passed, since the day he saved her name and vanished again like a ghost who'd fulfilled his duty. Now, her company was stable. The scandal had died. But her heart? It was quieter than it had ever been, like it had been waiting for a sound that hadn't come yet. Then she saw him. He was standing by the security desk, wearing the same sky-blue uniform she had first seen him in, crisp, humble, impossibly familiar. Pablo Floyd. For a moment, she just stood there, speechless. He looked up, and their eyes met across the vast lobby, two souls who had walked through storms, lies, and forgiveness to find one another again. Annie blinked hard, almost laughing through her disbelief. "Pablo, what are you doing here?" she asked softly, her voice echoing against the marble walls. He smiled, that same calm, steady smile that had first disarmed her months ago. "Working," he said simply, tapping the security badge on his chest. "At least for tonight." She frowned, walking closer. You're back in uniform?" He nodded. "I wanted to end where we began." Her heart clenched. His voice wasn't just calm, it was certain, grounded in something deeper than words. He stepped forward, one hand behind his back. "Annie," he said quietly, "do you remember the first day you saw me?" She laughed under her breath, eyes wet. "Yes. I thought you were just another guard." He smiled. "And I thought you were too busy to notice me at all." A pause hung between them, tender and alive. Then slowly, he brought his hand forward, and revealed a small velvet box. Annie's lips parted, breath catching. "Pablo." He opened it. Inside gleamed a simple ring, nothing extravagant, just a single diamond set on a silver band, glowing under the soft lobby light. Pablo looked at her with the same quiet sincerity that had melted her walls months ago. "I could have given you 100 rings, Annie," he began softly. "Gold, platinum, anything money could buy. But that's not what I want this to mean." He took a small breath. "I wanted to give it to you as the man you first met, the man who fixed your son's toy car, who shared sandwiches with your kids, who watched you walk into this building every day trying to hold a world together." His voice trembled now, low and raw. "I wanted you to know I'd choose you the same way again, even if I had nothing." Tears welled in Annie's eyes, spilling before she could stop them. He took one more step closer, then knelt down, right there on the marble floor, his blue uniform catching the golden light from the Christmas tree. Her breath broke. Pablo. He looked up at her, emotion softening his face. Annie Ross, he said. You taught me that kindness is richer than money, that love can live even in the loneliest hearts. You showed me what home feels like. Her hand flew to her mouth as her children's voices suddenly echoed through the lobby. Mom. Tony, Edward, and little Selena ran through the doors, cheeks flushed with cold, carrying a wrapped present each. They stopped when they saw Pablo kneeling, and their faces lit up. Mom, say yes. Tony shouted. Selena giggled, clapping her small hands. Mommy, he's asking you to marry him. Annie laughed through tears, shaking her head in disbelief. How did you? Pablo grinned. They helped me plan it. The children nodded proudly, crowding around them. Selena tugged at Annie's sleeve and whispered, Please, Mommy? He makes us happy. Annie looked down at Pablo, the man who had entered her life as a stranger, held her family together with warmth, and loved her without expecting anything in return. Her voice broke as she whispered, You never needed to be anyone else, Pablo. Not for me. Not for them. He smiled softly. I didn't need to be. You saw me long before anyone else did. The lobby fell silent. Snow swirled outside the glass doors like slow-motion confetti. Annie bent down, tears shining like diamonds under the lights, and whispered yes. Pablo slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly. Her kids cheered, the sound bouncing off the marble walls like music. And then, for the first time since her husband's death, Annie let herself fall into someone's arms, not out of need, but out of choice. Pablo held her close, resting his forehead against hers. I don't want to build towers anymore, he murmured. I want to build a home. She smiled through her tears. Then let's build it together. Outside, the city kept moving, cars, lights, and life. But inside the tower, time stood still. The guard had become her prince, not by wealth, but by worth. She thought she was falling for a guard, but she had found the man who made her heart safe again. Would you still fall in love with someone if you discovered they'd hidden their true identity, not to deceive you, but to protect their heart? If this act touched you, comment love is worth more than gold below speech balloon, and stay tuned for the house that love built, where Pablo and Annie's story comes full circle in a legacy of love, family, and forgiveness. Red Heart. A year later, the city skyline shimmered beneath a soft blanket of snow. Glass towers glowed gold against the pale December sky, their reflections glittering across the frozen streets. Among them stood one new structure, tall, graceful, and crowned with the name Selena Heights in silver lettering. Crowds gathered outside, cameras flashing, reporters buzzing. It wasn't just another real estate project, it was a miracle in steel and light. Inside the lobby, Annie Ross adjusted the pearl pin on her blazer and took a deep breath. She wasn't nervous, not anymore. Today wasn't about business or power. It was about love, rebuilt brick by brick. Behind her, Pablo fastened his tie, still in the same calm way he used to adjust his blue uniform. His hair had grown a little, and his eyes carried that familiar warmth, the quiet confidence of a man who had finally come home. Selena tugged on his sleeve, wearing a tiny pink coat and matching mittens. Daddy, she whispered, is this really our building? Pablo smiled down at her. It's our building, princess. Built for families like ours. Tony rolled his eyes but grinned proudly. Mom said you designed part of it. He chuckled. Maybe just the lobby, and the heart. Annie turned at that, smiling. He's being modest, she said to the children. He designed the whole concept, every part of it made to remind people they're never alone. When they stepped onto the stage together, the applause was thunderous. Photographers crowded forward, flashes sparkling like snowflakes. A reporter leaned toward the front row and called out, Ms. Ross. Mr. Floyd. People are calling you the modern Cinderella couple. How does it feel? Annie laughed, the sound rich and free. She looked at Pablo beside her, then at the crowd. Honestly, she said, it feels like we just believed love was worth risking. The audience fell silent, listening. She continued, her voice steady but full of emotion. A year ago, I thought success meant skyscrapers and contracts. But now, I know true success is building something that outlives you, something built on kindness. Selena Heights isn't just a building. It's a promise. A place for single parents, for families trying to start again, for anyone who ever felt unseen. Pablo placed a gentle hand on her back, his eyes glistening. And it's named after a little girl who reminded us that hope still laughs, even in the hardest moments. The crowd erupted in applause again, cameras flashing brighter this time. After the ceremony, as guests filtered through the new apartments and the media packed up, Annie and Pablo slipped away to the quiet rooftop terrace. The city stretched endlessly below them, lights blinking like constellations. The snow had begun again, falling softly, the same way it had the night they first met. For a moment, neither spoke. Pablo leaned against the railing, watching the snow swirl between them. "It's strange," he said quietly. "This used to be just another skyline. Now it feels alive." Annie stepped closer. "Maybe because you finally built something that isn't just for profit, but for people." He smiled faintly. "You changed that in me. I used to measure worth in numbers. Now, I measure it in hearts." She laughed softly. "You sound like a Hallmark card." He turned, brushing a snowflake from her cheek. "Then let me write the last line properly." Her breath caught as he leaned closer. "You gave me the one thing my billions could never buy," he whispered. "Home." Annie blinked away tears. "And you gave me the one thing my heart forgot," she smiled, her voice trembling. "Trust." Their hands intertwined, not in luxury or ceremony, but in peace. Behind them, the glass doors opened suddenly. 3 little voices echoed into the snowy night. "Mom. Dad. Come see." Annie and Pablo turned to see Tony, Edward, and Selena racing toward them, coats flying open, faces bright with joy. They threw themselves into Pablo's arms. Selena squealed, "Daddy, we have to take a family picture." Annie froze for a second. The word, "Daddy," lingered in the air like the softest melody. Pablo looked at her, emotion flooding his eyes. Annie nodded, smiling through tears. "Yes," she whispered. "You're their dad now." He pulled them all close, his arms wrapped around the family he never expected to find. For once, no cameras flashed. No headlines screamed. It was just them, the guard who became a father, the woman who learned to love again, and the children who'd brought them together. Later that night, as the city lights shimmered below and the snow thickened, a reporter posted the final story. The house that love built, how a billionaire and a single mother turned compassion into legacy. It went viral overnight. But neither Pablo nor Annie cared. Their legacy wasn't in the headlines. It was in the laughter echoing through Selena Heights, children running down warm hallways, mothers smiling again, families starting fresh. And as they stood at the window, watching the snow fall, Pablo whispered, "You know, this all started because your daughter dropped her toy that day in the lobby." Annie laughed. "And because you picked it up." "Funny," he murmured, eyes soft, "how the smallest act can change everything." She thought she was falling for a guard, but in truth, she fell into the kind of love that makes the world rich again. The camera would fade out on their silhouettes, a woman, a man, and 3 children standing before a glowing skyline, snow drifting like confetti. The glass tower that once symbolized ambition now stood as a monument to something greater, love that builds, heals, and lasts. Do you believe love can rebuild a life completely, not just hearts, but homes and legacies too? Comment "Love builds everything" if you believe compassion can change the world, or "Home is where love lives" if you think every great story starts with kindness. She thought she was saving a poor man's dignity, but he was secretly testing if love could survive without money. In the end, she didn't just find a partner, she found the truth every billionaire hides, that wealth means nothing without someone to come home to. If you believe love is the greatest fortune of all, hit subscribe to the Billionaire's Enclave, where every story reminds you that behind every fortune, there's a heartbeat.